The media fixates on kinetic events. Analysts warn of Russian Oreshnik missile strikes near Lviv, calculating risk of spillover into NATO territory. This is a deliberate misdirection. The missile is loud, visible, and already priced into the market. It is not the primary vector. The real threat is systemic and silent. It's the weaponization of absence. The blueprint was proven effective when drone attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure triggered cascading blackouts. A low-cost, asymmetric attack that exposed a high-cost conventional liability. That was the test phase. The protocol now targets the nervous system of the global economy. According to CSIS analysis, 99% of all international data and trillions in daily financial transactions travel through a handful of undersea fiber optic cables. This is the true center of gravity. Severing these cables, or blinding key satellites in low Earth orbit, does not simply disrupt communication. It creates a blind Leviathan, a superpower with overwhelming kinetic force, but stripped of its senses, its financial data, its targeting intelligence, its launch-on-warning protocols. A blinded state is a desperate state. Its solvency is threatened. Its command and control is compromised. It cannot absorb a first strike. This forces an asymmetric escalation, trading the tactical liability of a power grid for the strategic liability of a nuclear hair trigger. The vector isn't the missile. It's the silence that precedes it. State failure does not begin with a kinetic event. It begins with a solvency crisis. This is not merely a financial calculation on a spreadsheet. It is a crisis of political legitimacy. When a regime can no longer pay the political or economic costs required to maintain its narrative of strength, it is insolvent. The war is not the cause of the crisis. It is the desperate, final transaction to service an unpayable domestic debt. The conventional phase of the war in Ukraine was a mathematical failure. CSIS analysis confirms the conflict quickly became a severe domestic liability for Russia, draining state coffers and, more critically, political capital. An unpopular high-cost ground war is the fastest vector for depleting a regime's solvency. The Kremlin was not winning. It was liquidating its future stability for tactical stalemates. This fundamental weakness was then exposed by low-cost, high-impact asymmetry. Ukrainian drone attacks, systematically targeting the Russian energy grid, created widespread blackouts. This did not cripple the war machine, but it did something far more dangerous. It demonstrated to the Russian domestic population that the state was vulnerable. It proved the regime could not protect the homeland from inexpensive threats, invalidating its core promise of security. In the face of this liability, de-escalation is not an option. For an insolvent power, retreat is functionally equivalent to collapse. The domestic audience cannot be shown weakness. Therefore, the state is forced into a protocol of escalation. It must pivot from a domain of weakness, conventional warfare, to one of perceived strength. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical certainty driven by the need to maintain control. This pivot manifests as asymmetric escalation. The Kremlin traded the tactical liability of a porous energy grid for the strategic liability of a hypersonic weapon. The deployment of the Oreshnik missile near Lviv, as Ukrainian analysts warned, is the blueprint. This action risks a direct spillover into Poland, a NATO state. The objective is not tactical gain, but the projection of overwhelming, technologically advanced power to a domestic audience. It's a solvency transaction. This is the protocol. When conventional strength fails, a cornered nuclear-armed power will always trade manageable regional risk for uninsurable systemic risk. Weakness, not strength, is the primary accelerant forcing a direct confrontation between major powers. This isn't a miscalculation, it's the inevitable endgame of a solvency crisis playing out on a global scale. The central calculation of modern warfare is no longer troop strength or GDP. It is the kinetic cost of asset liquidation. According to analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, a $5 million main battle tank can be identified, tracked, and neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. The math doesn't lie. That is a 10,000 to 1 negative return on investment. This catastrophic cost inversion is a protocol known as the democratization of violence. It signifies that the capability to deliver precise, lethal force is no longer the exclusive domain of superpower budgets. It has been distributed to the lowest bidder. This creates a systemic liability for any power reliant on high-cost legacy platforms. When your primary assets are rendered economically indefensible, you are forced to escalate into a new domain, trading a tactical problem for a strategic, uninsurable one. While legacy media focuses on border disputes, they miss the primary staging ground. Regional instability, flagged in places from South Africa to Canada, is not the core problem. It is the proxy laboratory. These nations are designated gray zones, environments for beta testing economic and kinetic attacks before they are deployed against primary targets. The blueprint is documented. Reports confirm low-cost drones are used to trigger systemic blackouts and an energy crisis in Ukraine. This is not just a regional tactic, it is a proof of concept. It establishes the mathematical efficiency of crippling a billion-dollar grid with a $1,000 asset. This is the new calculus of warfare. Simultaneously, the non-kinetic playbook is refined. Look at Libya's central bank announcing a 14.7% currency devaluation. To a strategist, this isn't a local news item, it's a field test for inducing a solvency crisis from the outside. You test the contagion vector in a contained system before aiming it at a reserve currency. This protocol exists because conventional military options have become too expensive. According to CSIS analysis, the kinetic cost of a direct peer-to-peer conflict is prohibitive. Therefore, the adversary is forced to trade tactical liabilities for strategic ones. They perfect these low-cost attacks in the gray zone, knowing the eventual response will be asymmetric escalation from our side. The graduation from lab to live environment has already begun. Ukrainian analysts warn that the recent Russian Oreshnik missile strike near Lviv risk a spillover into Poland, a NATO state. This is the endpoint of the gray zone strategy, forcing the West to escalate from a position of weakness, transforming a manageable proxy war into an uninsurable systemic event. The testing phase is over. The core protocol of nuclear deterrence is launch on warning. The doctrine detailed in CSIS archives dictates a retaliatory strike be launched upon confirmation of an incoming enemy attack. The decision window is not hours, it is minutes. This entire system rests on a single fragile assumption, that your early warning radar is providing accurate data. But what happens when the signal is not just jammed, but hijacked? This is the fog of digital war. A cyber attack that successfully blinds early warning systems does not create uncertainty. It creates a mathematical certainty of the worst-case scenario. The protocol does not allow for a reboot. It assumes a decapitation strike is already in progress, and the radar blindness is the first kinetic effect. The commander is no longer a decision maker. They are the final gear in a pre-authorized machine. Their function is to execute the launch command out of protocol-enforced fear. This is not a hypothetical. We are seeing the precursor events. Low-cost drone attacks are causing systemic blackouts and degrading the energy crisis in Ukraine, as confirmed by CPG. This demonstrates a tactical liability. The response is not de-escalation, it is asymmetric escalation into a new domain. Russian deployment of advanced assets like the Oreshnik missile near Lviv, which analysts warn raises the risk of spillover into Poland, a NATO state. The stronger power has traded a tactical liability, an exposed energy grid, for a strategic one, deploying advanced weapons that shorten decision times for all nuclear powers. The next logical vector of attack in this escalation is not physical infrastructure, but the digital command and control network itself. Blinding the radar is cheaper than shooting down a hypersonic missile. The fog of digital war forces a launch out of fear, transforming a regional conflict into a systemic, uninsurable event. The calibration forecast is not a probability, it is a schedule. The drone attacks crippling Ukraine's energy grid are a public domain blueprint for the next phase. Within 12 months, a major transatlantic subsea data cable connecting New York to London will experience a catastrophic, multi-day outage. It will not be an accident. The event will be attribution impossible, officially blamed on seismic activity or a submerged anchor. The true purpose is a calibration shot. CSIS reports confirm that this non-kinetic attack vector allows a state actor to test Western response protocols without triggering a NATO Article 5 defense. It is the physical manifestation of the thesis. A declining power, facing conventional military liabilities, and seeing advanced weapons like the Oreshnik missile deployed near Poland create diminishing returns. Source Thurber 3 must escalate asymmetrically. They trade a low-cost physical action for a strategic liability in their adversary. Systemic financial contagion. The blackout forces a launch-on-warning posture in a new domain, the solvency of the Western banking system. The objective is to quantify the threshold of economic pain the West will absorb before risking a direct kinetic event. It transforms manageable regional conflicts, like the one in Ukraine, source number 1, into an uninsurable systemic risk. The vector is desperation, the weapon is plausible deniability, and the target is the fragile liquidity of your financial system.